Famous Jewish songwriters Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein wrote an amazing song, Climb Every Mountain. It's not just an inspirational title. When understood in the context of the Torah, it is a crucial ingredient in our Jewish national survival. We must go from under the mountain and constantly be climbing towards the top. This week's reading continues adding details to the giving of the Torah. Before it happened, the Jewish people initially said, all these things that God has said, we shall do. And then, a few verses later, they say something even more famous. All that God says we shall do and we shall hear. And the rabbis consider this an incredible thing. Not only do we add hearing, but we put it after doing. We committed to do first, even before we hear. But when you think about that, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. How can we do what we have not yet heard? How can we put the doing first? Unless you say it means we will do it when we hear it. Perhaps. But that's not the simple meaning of the words of the Torah. So what are Israel truly promising that is so wonderful? And another question. The rabbis say that God held the mountain over their heads and threatened them that if they did not accept the Torah, there would be their burial place. But wait a minute. Didn't they just say basically, okay, we're going to accept the Torah, we're going to do it? So I'd like to suggest, admittedly without proof, that the Na'aseh v'nishma, the famous we will do and we will hear, was said as the mountain was above them, because they hadn't yet given a satisfactory answer. The first response, all that God says we will do without the hear, was not enough, and God held the mountain over their heads, so we had to give a better answer. Let's remember the name of that mountain is Sinai. Highly significant, we will come back to it. Let's unpack all of this by going back to last week's reading. Yitro heard about the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek and came to Israel. The very next day, he advises Moses about setting up a judicial system that's going to work. And he concluded his advice by saying, if you do these things, this nation will come to its place in peace. So even before the Torah was given in Yitro, we have a hint to the body of civil laws and the process for resolving disputes among the people to give them peace. And after the Torah is given, in this week's reading, we have an exhaustive list of all of the commandments dealing with these exact things. How to maintain justice and fairness, which will, as Yitro said, bring this people to its place in peace. Why is this so important that all of these laws should immediately follow the Sinaitic revelation? So on a basic level, the late Rabbi Raphael Pelkowitz of Long Island explains that for revelation to be worth anything, it must immediately be followed by implementation. Getting all inspired is great, but if we don't take action, if we don't change anything in our lives as a result, it was all for naught. Two things motivated Yitro to come when he heard them: the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. One was not enough, and it wasn't just the quantity. A brilliant explanation I heard says that it was the two things together that raised a disturbing question in Yitro's heart. Because the splitting of the sea should have made everybody into a believer. How could anybody doubt God and his choosing of Israel after that? And then comes Amalek and attacks. Wow, so they didn't get the memo. They didn't have that fear of God, even though they were very aware of the splitting of the sea. Perhaps the human psychology is so weak that even the most powerful inspirational moment can fail to change our morality and our character if we fail to take action. And Yitro was afraid of this in himself, so he took action to find inspiration with a teacher of Moses' caliber. He didn't trust his own faith anymore. And I think he took that a step further, because on the very next day he urged Moses to do the same. Take action. Change the way the people are judged. Implement a long-term strategy for judging. With teachers everywhere. The day-to-day is where the true holiness comes from. Now Amalek will weaken resolve and erase all spiritual inspiration by simply delaying. Remember, he hit us when we were, quote, weak and fatigued. But there's more. Yitro had mentioned peace. The laws of Mishpatim preserve peace. Good laws between a man and his fellow will keep everybody living in harmony. But when there is no peace, then the outer enemies are encouraged to attack. Amalek came after we had argued with Moses, with God at Rephidim. And think about the months and the Yom Kippur prior to October 7th, 2023. So now we can understand the significance of being under the mountain rather than on top of it, and why all that God says we will do is woefully insufficient. Only we shall do and we shall hear will preserve the nation of Israel. God promises Israel two things as they arrive at Mount Sinai. One is that they will be a Am Segula, a chosen people. Then they will become a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The great Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik says that these are two very different things, because a person might observe the letter of the law, but fail to allow the letter of the law to change him. It is possible to entirely miss the point. That was the flaw with the first response. We will do what God told us, and that's it. What is the result of that? That we're only going to be a chosen people. And I say only because that phrase, chosen people, has incited so much hatred and anti-Semitism, because it marks us as different, but it does not mark us as magnificent. We keep different laws than the non-Jews do, but do not exhibit the holiness required, and that sounds like favoritism. Mount Sinai implies hatred. The word Sinai is from sin'ah, hatred, and the rabbis comment that this is where the hatred came from. If we are just going to be robotic observers of the law with no striving for holiness and prophecy, the mountain of hatred from the rest of the world can threaten us. Why shouldn't they hate us if we're claiming to be chosen, different, but not uplifting to them? But if we become a kingdom of priests and a nation that is holy, that is different. For that we have to say we will do and we will hear. Because hearing is not just listening, it is internalizing, and it is continuing to grow. We take the commandments and allow them to shape us, to show us how to be that kingdom of priests and that holy nation. And that not only takes us out from under the mountain, but it puts us on the mountain to climb it. It's interesting that the Torah says about the mountain that the Bnei Israel, the Israelites, are not allowed to touch it. But bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu v'har, when the shofar sound draws out, then they can climb the mountain. And Rashi explains when there is the long last sound of the shofar signaling that the divine presence is leaving, similar to what we do at the end of Yom Kippur, then we can go on the mountain. But the Torah phrases it when the shofar sound draws out. It does not say bichlot hashofar, when the shofar ceases. It says bimshoch, draws out. That's highly significant. That means committing to observe the laws in order to continuously grow spiritually, and doing it immediately, starting while the shofar still sounds, and then to keep that shofar going in our hearts. That takes us out from under the mountain of hatred and puts us on the path to the top of the mountain of love and respect. One more critical aspect. We often quote the verse in Deuteronomy that the nations of the world will see that the name of the Lord is called upon us and they shall revere us. What name of the Lord are we talking about? There are lots of them. I would like to suggest the name Shalom. It means peace. But the temple was destroyed because there was no shalom. There was sinat chinam, baseless hatred. But wait a second. Is there really such a thing as baseless hatred? I am sure that everybody hated somebody else, felt they had a very good reason for doing so. So who exactly was guilty of this baseless hatred? Well, the rabbis are telling us an unpleasant truth. Everybody. Because no matter what the reason, hatred should not be the response. Yes, a sinner can be punished and should be rebuked. There is such a commandment to do that, but all of those things must also be done with love. The Torah commands us to have reverence for our parents, for example. But if our parents tell us to violate the Shabbat, we are not allowed to listen to them. But does that mean we're exempt from respecting them? Obviously not. The great Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook famously said that the only way to restore the temple that had been destroyed through baseless hatred is through baseless love. So what is baseless love? When I ignore the flaws and even the sins of the other person and love them anyway. So baseless hatred then must be when I ignore all of the merits and wonderful aspects of the other person and hate them anyway. When we have peace, shalom, God's name is called upon us. And that is the name that the nations of the world will revere. That is only possible when we see each other as members of a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Even if we look at people who are sinners, we must see in them the potential to be so holy. Then God's name is called upon us, and then we are out from underneath that mountain of hatred, and we are on our way to the summit of the mountain of peace. We will do, we will hear. Hearing means internalizing God's message, keeping that shofar sound blasting in our hearts, lifting us up through his commandments. And hearing also means hearing and listening to each other. Just like Yitro heard and immediately took action, so must we.